They call it a weed, something you step on, pull out, throw away without thinking twice. It grows in the cracks of sidewalks, in abandoned fields, along roadsides where nothing else survives. Most people don't even look at it long enough to wonder what it is, but there was a time when this exact plant was worth more than gold, not metaphorically, literally. There are records, real documented accounts of civilizations that didn't just value this plant, they depended on it. It was traded across continents, guarded, protected, in some cases even restricted to the elite, and yet today, it's treated like it never mattered. So what changed? Because plants don't just lose value overnight, unless something forces them to. To understand this, you have to go back, far before modern systems, before industrial agriculture, before the idea that medicine comes in bottles. There was a plant known across multiple regions for one thing: resilience. It didn't need perfect soil, it didn't need constant care, it thrived in harsh environments, pulling nutrients from places other plants couldn't survive in. And that alone made it valuable. But that wasn't the real reason people prized it. The real reason was what it did inside the human body. Ancient texts from different parts of the world, written centuries apart, describe something almost identical. A plant that could restore balance, cleanse the blood, strengthen the body, and bring clarity to the mind. Different languages, different cultures, same description. That's not coincidence. And when modern researchers began analyzing these references, many of them pointed to a plant you've probably seen before. Dandelion? Yes, the same bright yellow flower people try to get rid of from their lawns. The same plant labeled as invasive, unwanted, useless. But once you strip away the label and actually look at it, the story changes, because dandelion isn't just a plant, it's a system. Every part of it, root, leaf, flower, serves a function. And ancient healers knew exactly how to use each part differently. The roots were used to support digestion and liver function. The leaves were consumed to replenish nutrients loaded with vitamins, minerals, and compounds that modern diets often lack. The flowers, even they had their role, used in preparations that supported circulation and overall vitality. But here's where it gets interesting. Modern science, when it actually studies dandelion, confirms a lot of this. It's rich in antioxidants. It has anti-inflammatory properties. It supports detoxification pathways in the body. Some studies even suggest compounds in dandelion may have anti-cancer potential at the cellular level. And yet, no one talks about it, at least not in a serious way. It's dismissed as just a weed. So how does something so useful become so ignored? This is where the timeline matters, because dandelion didn't suddenly become worthless. It was redefined. As agriculture industrialized, the focus shifted. Uniform crops, controlled growth, predictability, anything that didn't fit neatly into that system became a problem. Dandelion grows freely, it spreads easily, it doesn't follow rules, so it was labeled a weed. And once something is labeled, perception follows. People stopped seeing it as medicine. They started seeing it as a nuisance. But labeling alone doesn't erase value. Something else had to happen, and it did. As pharmaceutical systems developed, the model of medicine changed. Instead of whole plants, focus shifted to isolated compounds. Extract one active ingredient. Study it, standardize it, control it. But plants like dandelion don't work that way. Their power isn't in one compound. It's in the synergy of everything working together. And that kind of complexity is difficult to control, difficult to patent, difficult to profit from in the same way. So instead of being integrated, it was overlooked, quietly pushed to the side, not banned, not removed, just ignored. And over time, something strange happened. Generations grew up without ever learning what it was. The knowledge didn't disappear all at once, it faded. Grandparents who knew its uses stopped passing it down. Traditions broke, information got replaced by convenience, until eventually, a plant once worth more than gold became something you spray chemicals to destroy. And that's where the real question begins. Because if something this simple, this accessible, could be redefined so completely, what else has been? And more importantly, what are you still walking past without realizing what it is? Because dandelion is just one example. But it reveals a pattern where natural, accessible solutions become invisible, not because they stopped working, but because people stopped recognizing them. And once recognition is gone, value disappears with it. But here's the part most people don't realize. Dandelion never lost its properties. It never changed. Only our perception did. Which means everything ancient healers once knew about it is still true today, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to look again. And once you really start looking at it, the story becomes harder to ignore. Because dandelion isn't some obscure, rare plant hidden deep in a forest. It's everywhere, which raises a question that doesn't sit comfortably once you think about it long enough. If something so widespread, so accessible, and so consistently beneficial exists, why isn't it a central part of modern health? Why isn't it taught, used, or even respected at the level its properties suggest? Because the deeper you go, the more you realize this isn't just about one plant. It's about a shift in how knowledge itself is handled. Ancient systems didn't separate food from medicine. They didn't isolate healing into a specialized field controlled by a few. Instead, knowledge was decentralized. Communities understood the basics. Healers refined it, protected it, and passed it on. And plants like dandelion were foundational, not rare cures, not last resorts, daily tools, consumed regularly, integrated into diets, used preventatively, not reactively. That's a completely different model from what most people are used to today. Because today, health is often something you think about after something goes wrong. But back then, the idea was simple. Maintain balance, and disease struggles to take hold. And dandelion fit perfectly into that philosophy. Its bitterness, something most modern palates avoid, was actually one of its most important features. Bitter compounds stimulate digestion, support liver function, and trigger processes in the body that keep systems running efficiently. But here's the problem. Modern diets removed bitterness. Processed foods replaced it with sugar, salt, and artificial flavors. The very taste signals your body uses to activate certain functions were slowly erased. And with them, the role of plants like dandelion started to disappear. Not because they stopped working, but because the environment around them changed. And this is where the story takes a deeper turn. Because when scientists look at dandelion today, they don't just see a plant, they see complexity. Dozens of active compounds interacting at once. Polyphenols, flavonoids, sesquiterpene lactones, each playing a role, each influencing different systems in the body. And unlike synthetic solutions that target one pathway, dandelion works across multiple systems at the same time. That's not a flaw, that's a different philosophy. But it's also much harder to reduce into a single product, which means it doesn't fit neatly into modern frameworks. And when something doesn't fit, it gets sidelined. But here's where things get even more interesting. Because despite being ignored in everyday conversation, dandelion hasn't been completely dismissed in scientific circles. It's just studied quietly. There are research papers examining its effects on inflammation, blood sugar regulation, liver health, even cellular behavior. Some findings are still early, some are still debated, but the pattern is consistent. There's more here than people assumed, much more. And yet, you rarely hear about it. No major campaigns, no widespread awareness, no urgency to bring it back into daily life. It just exists in the background. Almost like it's being acknowledged, but not emphasized. And that brings you to an uncomfortable realization. Because suppression doesn't always look like something being hidden. Sometimes it looks like something being understated, minimized, presented as trivial, so people never think to look deeper. And dandelion fits that pattern perfectly. You've seen it your whole life. You've been told what it is, a weed, something to remove, something with no real value. And once that idea is planted early enough, it becomes automatic. You stop questioning it. But here's the shift. Because once you understand what dandelion actually contains and how it interacts with the body, you can't go back to seeing it the same way. You start noticing things, like how a plant that grows in harsh conditions develops stronger protective compounds, and how those same compounds can support the human body. You start realizing that resilience in nature often translates into usefulness, and suddenly, that weed doesn't look so useless anymore. It looks intentional, like something designed to be available, not rare, not exclusive, accessible, which leads to a question that changes everything once it settles in. What if the most valuable solutions were never meant to be rare? What if they were meant to be everywhere, so no one could control access to them? Because think about it, gold is valuable because it's scarce, but something that grows freely everywhere can't be monopolized. It can't be restricted. It belongs to everyone. And maybe that's exactly why its value had to be redefined. Because if people truly understood what was available to them, without needing permission, without needing to buy access, the entire structure around dependency starts to weaken. And that's not a comfortable shift for any established system. So instead of removing the plant, the perception was removed. And once perception changes, reality follows. But the plant itself, it never left. It's still here, still growing, still carrying the same compounds, the same properties, the same potential it always had, which means the only thing missing now is recognition. And once recognition returns, everything changes. Because the moment you stop seeing it as a weed and start seeing it for what it actually is, you're no longer just looking at a plant. You're looking at proof. Proof that something can go from priceless to worthless without ever changing at all. And that realization doesn't just apply to dandelion, it applies to everything you think you already understand. Because if something this obvious could be overlooked for so long, what else is hiding in plain sight? And how much of what you've been told is just a matter of perspective? And once that question settles in, it doesn't leave you, because now it's not just about dandelion anymore, it's about the pattern. A pattern that repeats itself quietly across history, where something simple, natural, and widely available starts out as essential, then slowly becomes irrelevant, and eventually disappears from everyday awareness altogether. Not because it stopped working, but because people stopped seeing it. And when you look closely, dandelion follows that pattern almost perfectly. There was a time when people didn't just tolerate it, they relied on it. In parts of Europe, it was cultivated intentionally, not removed. It was eaten as food, brewed as tonic, used daily as a support system for the body. In traditional Chinese practices, it was valued for clearing heat and supporting detox pathways. In Arabic and African traditions, it was part of herbal preparations that focused on restoring internal balance. Different systems, same respect. But then something subtle happened. As societies modernized, knowledge became compartmentalized. Food became one category, medicine became another, and anything that didn't clearly belong to one or the other started to lose its place. Dandelion sat right in the middle. Too medicinal to be just food, too common to be treated as medicine, so it slipped through the cracks. And once it did, it became invisible. But here's where the story reaches its most important point. Because invisibility doesn't mean absence. It means overlooked. And the consequences of overlooking something like this are bigger than they seem. Because when you remove small, consistent supports from daily life, things that quietly help the body maintain balance, you don't notice it immediately. Nothing dramatic happens at first. But over time, the effects build. Systems become less efficient, recovery takes longer, imbalances become more common, and eventually, what could have been maintained turns into something that needs intervention. And that's when people start looking for solutions, not realizing that some of those solutions were once part of everyday life. That's the hidden cost of forgetting. It's not just the loss of knowledge, it's the shift from prevention to dependency. And dandelion sits right at the center of that shift. Because it represents something most people no longer consider: the idea that health isn't something you fix, it's something you maintain. And maintenance doesn't require complexity, it requires consistency. Something ancient systems understood deeply, something modern systems often overlook. But here's where things take one final turn. Because even now, right now, there's a quiet shift happening. People are starting to look back, not in a nostalgic way, not trying to recreate the past exactly as it was, but asking questions, re-examining what was dismissed, looking at plants like dandelion, not as weeds, but as data points, clues. And when those clues are followed carefully, without assumptions, without bias, they lead somewhere unexpected. They lead to the realization that maybe not everything old was outdated. Maybe some things were simply misunderstood, or inconvenient, or impossible to fit into a system that values control over complexity. Because the more you study dandelion, the clearer it becomes. It doesn't behave like a product. It behaves like a process. It supports the body in ways that don't force change, but encourage it. And that's harder to measure, harder to standardize, but not harder to experience. And that's the difference. Because once someone actually uses it correctly, understands how it fits into a broader approach, not as a quick fix, but as a consistent support, the results aren't dramatic in the way people expect. They're subtle, but undeniable. Energy stabilizes, digestion improves, the body feels lighter, more responsive. Not because something was fixed overnight, but because something started working again the way it was supposed to. And that's the part that doesn't get advertised. Because subtle doesn't sell. Consistency doesn't create urgency. And natural doesn't create dependency. But it creates something else, awareness. And awareness is where everything begins to shift. Because once you become aware of something like this, you start questioning more. You start noticing patterns you didn't see before. You start realizing that value isn't always determined by visibility or popularity or what people tell you matters. Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones that require you to look twice, to question the label, to ignore what you've been told, just long enough to see what's actually there. And that brings you back to where this started: a plant, a weed, something most people would walk past without a second thought. And yet, At one point in time, it was protected, valued, even prioritized above precious metals, not because it was rare, but because it was useful, consistently, reliably, quietly useful. And maybe that's the real reason it faded from importance, because in a world that chases complexity, simplicity is easy to underestimate until you realize what it was doing all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting not to be discovered, but to be recognized again. And once you recognize it, you don't just see dandelion differently, you see everything differently.